what I've now since realized so much is that shame that I would experience sometimes when I was out of integrity with my values, which I maybe not would have been able to write down on a piece of paper because no one had asked me them, or I hadn't constructively, intentionally, through my feelings and my body's response to things, actually written down what they were. And then if I was to then write them down, then now I'm accountable to them, and I got to clean up my whole life, because to me, that's healing.
Oh, totally.
Like, you wonder why you have anxiety or depression, or you feel off, or you feel overwhelmed. It's because you're overriding and probably violating one or multiple values that you have.
Hey gang, I am so excited to share this week's episode with you. I had the incredibly good fortune to sit down with the one and only Mark Groves, founder of Create the Love, host of the Mark Groves podcast, and most recently, co-author of the book Liberated Love, which he wrote with his wife, Kylie. During our conversation, we tackle a lot of topics relating to how we show up as people, personal accountability, relationships, boundaries, all of that good stuff. And I could sit here and tell you a lot more about it, but why waste any more time when we could just jump into the conversation? So let's do it. Hi, I'm Nikki LaCroce, and you're listening to Can I Just Say? And today I'm super excited for our guest, Mark Groves, to be here. A big part of why this is such an important moment for me and just a monumental time is because Mark's episode, Crushing Codependency Myths with Terry Cole, was really the catalyst for helping me leave the codependent, abusive relationship that I was in, and ultimately launched me forward to where I am now and living a life that I do truly love and I'm grateful for. So with that, I will say I am indefinitely grateful to you, and welcome to the show, Mark.
Oh my God, I'm so excited to be here. And what a powerful transformation that is, eh?
No
I think
kidding.
that's why the power of podcasting, or whatever our vehicle of expression is, you don't even realize what it can do.
Right, right.
To think like a conversation I had with Terry Cole helped you find a way to transform your life and notice the things that were unhealthy, in whatever way.
Yeah.
To move forward, and look what you've created from that.
It's incredible. And I feel like it's kind of funny. My therapist is the one who recommended the episode to me. I had been following your content, and I was really trying to think about this earlier today. I was like, when did I start listening to your show? Because I think it happened pretty organically. I must have been following Create the Love because for a long time you had a lot of quotes that were like very powerful. And I then found you and your podcast, and there are several vivid moments that I have listening to your show, even in moments where your relationship with your now wife, Kylie, was deconstructing at the time. And I remember being in my car listening to this and thinking to myself, oh, okay, I thought that was, his partner that had been established, and this was going to be the relationship that you were in. I may have even thought you were married at the time. And so I feel like kind of being witness to your experience and your growth and your accountability to yourself opened my mind and heart to the idea that, okay, like, even if it has these moments that feel right, like, are you feeling true to yourself? And I really admire that that's what you bring to the table. You have a very beautiful way of expressing yourself with such integrity, and you also share outwardly so much that people keep inside. So in terms of kind of kicking off the conversation, do you feel like you've always been that way? Has this always been a part of yourself that you have had access to or felt inclined to share with people, that emotionality that, quite honestly, a lot of men, at least historically, have not been comfortable sharing?
Man, what a great point of inquiry. No, I haven't. And I think a lot of that was when I was younger. It became so important to me now because I didn't do it. Like the cost of having these internal dialogues, these internal narratives, these internal thought processes that really I was stewing on, I was storing, I was hiding. I even think of some of the hardest relational moments, which, I might have processed with good friends on the phone. When you're a teenager, you're like, you spend way too much time talking on the phone. Maybe people don't now. I don't know. They just snap each other.
Right.
Or FaceTime. They probably FaceTime, which is more intimate. But I didn't outwardly express all the things I was navigating. I kind of hid the things I was ashamed of or afraid of. And when I started my journey of learning about relationships, it was because an engagement ended. And it was through that I was just catalyzed, to want to discover and learn so much about why I wasn't good at them. Like, it was very self-oriented.
Yeah.
Like, how did I get to a place where I forgot about myself and I forgot about what mattered to me? How long had it been since I'd done that? I realized that if you don't pay attention to why you're choosing what you're choosing, or even what you're choosing, you can live a very long period, if not a whole life, unconsciously and in some way directionless, but really motivated by what other people see as a successful life or the right thing to do, quote unquote. It was when I started to write about what I was learning about relationships and the things that I had done, quote unquote, wrong, that I started to see the value in other people witnessing themselves through my vulnerability. And really my writing that's where it started. I wrote a blog. It was a way that I could excise my shame. Like, I could get it out of me. Like, I didn't show up properly. I was shallow, or I was this, but here's what I've learned. And so there was this, also an accountability.
I love that you started there.
Yeah.
Because it was actually something that I wanted to lead with. And I was like, do I jump right into this and go right at it? With that segue.
Right to the core.
So accountability is, I feel, it starts with self-awareness. And then once you're aware, you need to become accountable if you're going to make any sort of change. And so do you feel like there's something that you look back on and you say, that was the hardest part of myself to face, that I had to acknowledge, accept, and then actually decide I was going to transform? Speaking about shame, I think that that's for a lot of us the underlying thing. But do you have any recognition of what maybe the core of that shame was?
Yeah, I can remember the first time I really journaled was after so there was this woman I was dating, and I could tell I wanted to break up with her. I needed to break up with her. And I was like, okay, I had made a rule at that point in my life that I had to have every conversation I didn't want to have. So I was like, okay, I got to have this conversation. I don't want to have it, but I have to. But I was like, I'll just put it off. So I put it off for 2 weeks. And then when I finally broke up with her, she said to me, you knew this 2 weeks ago, but you kept stringing me along, and I ended up investing more deeply, and you didn't invest at all. You were just preparing for this conversation. And I remember that night when she left, there was just so much truth to what she was saying. And I actually saw the impact of my delay in having a conversation. I saw
Interesting.
And so I adjusted my rule that I have to have every conversation I don't want to have, and I have to have it as soon as I know I need to have it.
I look forward to my wife hearing this conversation, because she was much better at that, as she told me prior to our meeting, that she could establish that, I'm not in this anymore. I'm not going to pretend to be in this. Whereas I was the one who, if I felt somebody kind of pulling away, I was probably similar to the person that you were dating at the time, where I'm like, what can I do to invest more that will maybe make you realize that you want to be in this?
Right.
You posted something the other day about, don't be in a relationship where somebody else doesn't want to be in it with you. And I felt that on such a visceral level, because the type of codependent I was the one who really leaned into, I can do more, I can be more, I can show up more for you. However, to do that, I'm going to abandon myself. And that piece of shame and that accountability, they weren't at the surface for me yet. It was like there was a very deep-seated shame that allowed me to live in that space, to try to pretend that something was something that it wasn't, to allow me to lie to myself for so long. And then also the lack of accountability, because I didn't want to acknowledge that what I felt to be true was actually true. And so I feel like having the ability to, as you're saying, identify that, not only be accountable to it, but also to say, I have to set this boundary for myself so that not only can I sort of release somebody from, whatever I might be contributing to a relationship that's not healthy, but for myself to really be free and explore what's right for me. Like it's a service, I think, to both people in a relationship if you have that recognition and you can say, I care about you, but it's not a fit.
Oh, I mean, that's love, right? Like there's this idea, especially for people who are martyrs or like people pleasers, chasers. If someone in the relationship is dysfunctional and the relationship doesn't change and stays intact, that means both people in the relationship are dysfunctional. So if we are knowingly or unknowingly participating in dysfunction, we are part of it. Yeah. And I think one of the aspects of relational teachings that really kind of emphasizes the continue to fight for things is this idea that people, let's say, who are anxiously attached or people pleaser or codependent, they all tend to overlap because they're a cluster of behaviors.
Yeah.
And we could choose whatever label, but it's really people who tend to self-abandon and oscillate and prioritize other people's needs at the cost of themselves and of their own safety, of their own security.
Right.
And so the conversation that tends to happen is, well, there's something wrong with the person you're in relationship with, but actually it is the leaving of your own center, the leaving of yourself that is also, I don't want to say something wrong, but it's dysfunctional. It's not producing healthy relationships, because if you need someone to finally see your worth, someone to have some sort of problem that you need to solve, then them getting healthy or them providing you with the thing that you seek from them, it doesn't create healthy relationship dynamics.
Right.
They're conditional. It's like very conditional. It's so codependent. Yeah. And, I have a friend who said that in their healing of their codependency, that they could turn anyone codependent. They were so good. They could take like a fully functioning normal human and make them underfunction, which I was like, that's pretty funny.
Yeah, what a skill.
Right?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I mean, I think that growing up, I don't think I understood how prone I was to abandoning myself. And a lot of what happened when I would be in therapy, and I remember when I started because I felt passionless in my work. And then it was like, here's all the other stuff you should really be focusing on. And when that happened, I started to look back at my life and really think, okay, well, when did this insecurity start? When did I start not feeling good enough? And I'm curious, something that I don't know that I've heard you talk about a lot in your show, and maybe you haven't, I just haven't caught these episodes, is when you were younger, have you looked at that part of your life and established if there was a time or a pattern or things that were modeled to you that kind of cultivated that sense of shame, or that essentially the effect that like developed your codependency?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably multi-layered in how it expressed, in that I'm the youngest of three. My mom was a stay-at-home mom and then went back to college while we were young. And my mom was overwhelmed. She was overwhelmed a lot. And because she was overwhelmed, there's this unconscious thing like, well, if my mom isn't okay, then I'm not okay.
Yeah.
Right? So I started to oscillate around my mom's feelings. And I would say that I became like the good boy, not make any mistakes, keep it all together, because I didn't want to contribute to more overwhelm. And, it's like our society is structured to have overwhelmed moms, to have overwhelmed people. So this is no shame or blame on her. It's actually the result of the fact that the way that we have structured, at least especially in the Western world, that people are not, there is, it takes a village, it's a saying. We just happen to not have such proximity anymore, right? Which I think immigrant households do such a good job of, like, maybe through necessity, but through tradition, that they have multi-generational homes, which that's how you alleviate some of the weight of carrying things. Now, granted, there's a line between collectivism and overt independence. Yeah. Both have toxicity, which you could see express itself in many ways in families and culture. But, and that really speaks, that's the meta version of, can I be myself and be in a relationship?
Right.
Can I oscillate between like, I'm a me and you're a you and there's an us, most of us either abandon ourselves for relationship or abandon relationship for self.
So many people, I think, end up settling for something that isn't really in integrity with who they are because they have a belief about themselves or of what a relationship should be that they're sort of navigating towards instead of pausing and sort of like adjusting and asking themselves, well, does this feel right? Mm-hmm. Does this feel true to who I am and what I want and how I want to be treated, how I want to feel I can treat the person that I'm with? And when you speak about sort of the way that relationships have been exposed to us and shown like this is what you do, whether that's parent-child relationships and the way that, you know, a lot of mothers sacrifice for their children. My mom was also a stay-at-home mom for a long time. And that was after she had this really big life where she did a lot for herself. And so, you know, you see that sacrifice. And I think some of that, you know, in my life, I'm sure weighed on me. And then at the same time, there's these moments that I think about where it's like just in the process of learning more about myself in the relationship where I wasn't happy and denying that.
Right.
And just like shoving aside that feeling of disconnect from self in the interest of trying to connect more deeply with somebody else. And it's like, oh, ew, like, no, don't do that, you know, but it's kind of one of those, in hindsight, it's very easy to see, but in the thick of it, it's really challenging. Yeah.
Yeah, it's survival. It comes from such a beautiful place.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, it ends up as an adult being really painful because it was painful for the kid. And you think about how many of us are taught to override our needs, our wants, our senses. So, you know, if you're like in your childhood taking care of your siblings, taking care of your parent, have an alcoholic parent, a narcissistic parent, an overwhelmed parent, like you have an addict, like you have all these, your life becomes around other,
right?
And then you forget about a self or never developed one fully just because there wasn't an adult there and there wasn't enough support. You know, like I think so many of us are born into relationship or born into family raised by children, emotionally children, right?
Yeah.
And that's like, that's not an insult. It's just that developmentally, we are now being asked to move to another level. We're being asked to actually grow up emotionally. And that requires an immense amount of responsibility and accountability. And it doesn't begin without accountability. And, you know, there's no transformation that begins without a come to Jesus moment of like getting with the truth. And I think, you know, coming back to your question that you asked earlier, it was like, I had to be with the truth of who I was being and like how I was showing up. And that started with the recognition of like that, you know, that woman saying that to me that led me to start journaling like, oh my God, I did do that. I caused her harm because of my fear of a hard conversation. So me not showing up to something I know, and now it was just glaringly true that I knew that I needed to have those conversations quickly because I was hurting someone else through my own fear of being an adult.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Like, what I have now since realized so much is that shame that I would experience sometimes when I was out of integrity with my values, which I maybe not would have been able to write down on a piece of paper because no one had asked me them or I hadn't constructively, intentionally, through my feelings and my body's response to things, actually written down what they were. And then if I was to then write them down, then now I'm accountable to them and I got to clean up my whole life because to me, that's healing.
Oh, totally.
Like you wonder why you have anxiety or depression or you feel off or you feel overwhelmed. It's because you're overriding and probably violating one or multiple values that you have.
Yeah.
And what happens when we do that is we experience what I would call healthy shame. I was talking to a friend the other day and they're like, all shame is toxic. And I'm like, no. Shame that is about the violation of your own integrity and morality, which is different than the shame from projected morality from religion.
Yeah.
That shame that is our own value system that we're in violation of, if we do not listen and change our behavior and get into alignment, then it becomes toxic. But that would be true of any unhealthy choice.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be correlated to shame. Because any choice you make that you know is not good for you says that the information your body's giving you is not valuable and that you're not valuable. And so that will all correlate to autoimmune, to all these different things, because what is autoimmune? The body is at war with itself. It is fighting itself. Well, what are you doing when you don't listen to your values? When you don't make choices that are aligned? You're at war with yourself. So it's like, what a physical manifestation of that. And don't get me wrong, a lot of autoimmune and those types of presentations occur really young. They can occur through onsets of trauma very early in our life before we're even consciously, right? So it's like,
we still there's intergenerational trauma too, right? That you don't know what's affecting you.
Oh my gosh, you can look up your family tree and it'll express differently. There's beautiful research on this, but it'll express differently if your great-grandfather or your great-grandmother went through a famine. It'll express differently in the generations below based on if it's the maternal or paternal arm. But you can see, like, there's mice who are exposed to the smell of cherry blossoms and they're shocked. And then when they observe 3 generations later, when mice are exposed to the smell of a cherry blossom, which we live in Vancouver, they're beautiful.
Yes. These
mice run from it because they've never been shocked with a cherry blossom association. But because generationally they're still afraid of cherry blossoms, even though there's technically nothing to fear. Well, think about how that shows up in all of us. If your great-grandmother expressed a boundary and was abused or hurt or hung or burned at the stake, that epigenetically, you're not going to be speaking out about things.
Right.
So you wonder why it's so hard to put words to something. You can just look up your family tree and be like, what happened the last time someone put words to a feeling? Oh, so this is survival. So when I need to access my voice, why is it so hard? Why does it feel like when you tell someone to work on a boundary and you're like, just say no to dinner on Friday.
Yeah.
And they're like, and I'm saying to them, like, have compassion, because your access to a no could have genetic imprinting that is saying you're going to die.
Right.
And even though it's just dinner, well, it's also disappointing people. So then you have to look, how did I relate to disappointing people in my childhood? What was I taught? What was my family system? What did it teach about it? So, it's all multi-layered. Being a human is complex, but it is simple in one sense, that it's like, what matters to you? What do you value? If you don't know what that is, who do you look up to? Those are probably values you want to emulate. So you adopt their values.
Right.
And then you just find better fits. You fine tune them.
Yeah, I like that idea. And I feel like it's really interesting that you brought up the values thing, because that was actually something that when I exited the last relationship that I was in, it was like the week that my wife and I established that we had feelings for each other. And I was in therapy, and just sort of this recognition of, okay, in feeling needed, I felt wanted. And so had to unpack that. And then I was like, okay, so all I ever wanted was for somebody to love me the way that I loved them. That was my standard. And something that you mentioned in an episode that I was listening to was like, do you even have standards, right? And the way I established for myself before getting into something else, and what I really needed to do and didn't realize until that moment, was, what are my core values?
Mm-hmm.
Sort of theoretically, I knew what they were, right? Like they exist. Like I tried to embody things.
Yeah.
But the actual, look at it on paper and establish this for yourself. This is how you feel about it. Actually led me to the opportunity to create a list of my wants, needs, and deal breakers. The list of deal breakers was mostly a list of things that were related to my ex.
Yeah, they become pretty obvious.
I was like, none of these things, thank you.
Yeah.
Then I was like, but what do I really want? What are the things that I'd like to have? And okay, great. If I can have those, awesome. And then there are the needs. These are the things that I will not abandon.
Right.
These are the things that I have to hold true to, because most of my last relationship, I was abandoning myself. And my therapist had said to me, the hardest thing that will happen when you're leaving a narcissistic relationship is reclaiming your sense of self. And I was like, that is a factual statement.
Filled with so much grief.
Yeah. And it's, and to your point, sort of shame, the disappointment, the frustration with myself for abandoning myself and going down that road of, how did I let this happen? But what I really find so beautiful about it, and in relation to what you're saying, is it prompted me to take a really hard look at myself and think, okay, this is who I perceive myself to be. but these are the actions that I'm taking, and that doesn't align. If these two things are not the same, or at least, trending the same direction, how can I feel that I'm being true to myself? And if I'm not being true to myself, how can I show up in other relationships in my life, romantically or otherwise, that actually are going to help me grow and flourish and also be the best I can be as a part of somebody else's support system? So I feel like the idea of really thinking about and understanding and establishing your values in more than a theoretical sense, really putting it on paper and forcing yourself to look at it, was just a pivotal moment to be able to say, okay, this is a big part of who I am and what I care about. And if I'm going to move forward in my life, then I need to do my best to live in integrity with these things. And one of those values being integrity, and making sure that I'm showing up for myself first and foremost. And that's something that you and Kylie talk about a lot, and you in general with your show, is that coming back to self and really saying, like, how does this fit into who I am in my life? But also that we need to be open and willing to adapt, because we're learning and changing and figuring that out as we go. So it's not like the shame shouldn't be associated with the fact that you're shifting. In fact, I think a good way to release the shame is to recognize that those shifts are happening, and then also give yourself space and compassion and grace for knowing more now than maybe you knew then.
Yeah, I think void of the application of the awareness is where the shame becomes toxic. So it's like, it's Maya Angelou who has that quote, like, when we know better, do better.
Yes.
Right. And what a beautiful quote. What a shareable quote.
Right.
But a livable quote is very different. It's livable, but it requires what you're saying is like, okay, I've written down who I am, who I think myself to be, who I want myself to be.
Right.
Right. My idealized self. And then it's like, who am I being? Well, that gap, as you're talking about, creates a dissonance if it's not aligned. I remember one of my favorite quotes, you probably heard me share it, is from Ram Dass, where he says, he quotes, I think it's Gandhi, who says, let my life be my message. And Ram Dass says, I hope that I live with the integrity that the truths that live within me are the same as the truths that live outside of me. And when that isn't true, I'm sending a message of both love and fear. I think a lot about that. When I heard that, I remember exactly where I was walking. I was walking through Washington Square Park in New York. And I remember just being like, oh, that's like the verbal expression of what I experience when I'm not in alignment. Is like, I'm actually sending a message of fear and love. So I'm split. And, I think like to aspire to always be in integrity is a goal, not a possibility.
That's a really good point.
Right? It's like in AA, they have that famous line that it's about progress, not perfection. Because it's just more of punitive consciousness if you're like, oh, I made that mistake. I'm such a fuck up. I'm this, I'm that. And it's like, you can be with, I made a mistake, and then change, because then you start to have gratitude for your awarenesses, for your pain, for your suffering, for the things you've been through in your life. I think it's much easier to let something go, no matter what the experience is. And that's not to minimize the experiences people have had, but it's a lot easier to let go of the pain that lives there when you actually turn it into a transformation. And that can be really hard because, that conversation brings up things like abuse, things like domestic violence. Those are all such incredibly important, sensitive subjects to acknowledge, right? And the hard part is that you can't, nor can I, go back in our past and change any of that. Okay, well, that's true. So we could just be with that truth. Okay, well, if I have to adopt this line that I hear personal growth people talk about, where they say it happened for you, not to you. And then, of course, what I see in response to that is, oh, yeah, the abuser happened for me. Great, right?
Yeah,
like,
totally.
What an awful perspective to have someone have to hold in that sort of bypassy thinking.
Yeah.
But on some level, there is truth to the saying. It's just that it needs to have a lot of small print that says you can be the victim of something.
Yeah.
And you are the victim of things. And you're the victim of other people's behavior sometimes. Okay. Like hold the compassion for that, because that's a big one. And there is so much learning to cultivate from it. Because if you look at the experience, and what a sensitive topic, so I acknowledge this, but it's like, if you look at the experience of a child who experiences abuse, they couldn't have access to it now.
Right.
Okay, well, if we're going to just touch that tender space and be like, how's my relationship to no today? Maybe up our lineage, that no was never there. And that's why you see cycles of abuse move through families and all that kind of stuff. But it's like, man, to hold the complexity of that requires us to recognize the complexity of our experience, to say, okay, I can't change it. If I was to just touch the idea, just to try it on, that there's an experience of growth and expansion that can be invited from it. Not thanks universe for delivering me this. Yeah. Oh God, you're so great for giving me suffering. Yeah. But it's like, what could I get from it? What could I extract from that would change me forever? Because it has.
Wow. Yeah.
Right? Like I could either let the story change me forever, that I'll never move through it and I'll never let it go. But this idea of forgiveness or moving on is somehow giving approval to something is not true. It's like, to forgive something is to decide for yourself that you don't want to hold on to the pain of it anymore. And the way to do that is to at least give it purpose in whatever way we can. You know, because think of like the greatest transformations really occur when someone gets to the place of never again.
Well, that's a beautiful way of putting it. I love that. Everything you just said, I think, is spot on. And in just reflecting on my own experience and knowing the never again was a massive factor in that, but also to really, as you said, sit with it. I say frequently that I would never, if I could have achieved the growth that I've achieved and the transformation, to your point, without having gone through the things that I went through, 100%, I would be like, didn't need that to happen. Great. Happy to be here.
I'll take the easier path on life number 2.
Yeah. Totally. And we'll just expedite it.
I'll take the life with a yacht.
Yeah.
And a healthy family system.
Yes.
And a helicopter. And a Lamborghini.
Yes. Well, you know what? I could even do without the Lambo. I'm just good with lay flat flying. That's just like, make sure I can rest.
Once you taste to sleep in the air, it's hard to go back.
It is. I feel like my first job changed.
I remember my job as a rep when I was in pharma. They had to fly you first class if you went intercontinental for meetings and stuff. Yep. And I remember getting on the plane and they're like, oh, your seat's right here. And I was like,
I had a similar moment. I was like, and this will be my life.
Right.
I mean, while I'm like, economy's fine.
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking of a Seinfeld episode where the flight attendant's standing, closing the curtain. Oh, yeah. Hey, do you know this one? And he says, or she, I can't remember, says, if only you worked a little harder, and closes the curtain.
Yes.
Yeah, it's true. Once you try laying down in the air, it's
life-changing.
It's hard to go back to the vertical, your feet getting swollen.
They're like, would you like 4 extra inches? That will be $100. And you're like, I don't think I do.
Yeah. Or how about freshly baked cookies and a good sleep?
Yes, exactly. But yeah, I think that looking at that part of my life and, you know, as I mentioned, just some of your content hit home so deeply at a time when I needed it in those moments, because it was like hearing somebody else reflect these moments, these profound realizations of what it means to sit with yourself and to really establish that awareness and that knowing, because your body is telling you, as you mentioned earlier. And when you can feel it, but you're not doing something about it, I feel like that's the state of sort of perpetual victimhood that a lot of people find themselves in. It's the acknowledgement that it happened to you and the either unwillingness and or inability to extract yourself from that state of victimhood. And I really appreciate what you said about, you know, those things happen and they're valid. I mean, I literally was in an abusive relationship. Right. I was very unaware because I wasn't familiar with the ins and outs of covert narcissistic abuse. And so one of the hardest things for me.
That's why it's covert.
Right? Yeah. It's aptly named. One of the biggest things, even recently, like, I mean, present time right now that I've been having to access and really acknowledge is I've been able to speak about it really objectively. I've been able to say, this is what happened. I've been able to tell people the story. The thing that I'm still like, but how do you feel about it? And not in the way where I was at first really resentful and angry and disgusted with my ex and my own shame that was encompassing me. But it's like, that really happened. Sit with it. Give yourself space to acknowledge what that really means. And part of why I feel like I was so motivated to transform with a forward trajectory was because I witnessed my ex living in a state of victimhood constantly, the targets on my back, nothing ever goes right, et cetera. And having this just really heightened awareness of, I will not be somebody that lets these things define me. I will be somebody that allows these moments to propel me forward and help me grow. And because I lost my mom, like literally at the same time that exiting of that relationship was happening.
It's a lot of loss. Yeah.
Yeah, it was intense. And I did a couple of solo episodes where I spoke about how it was two really different types of grief happening at the same time.
I bet.
And it was,
how would you differentiate them?
That's a great question. Thank you. So I would say one was a loss that I was grateful for because it gave me the freedom that I needed. And it also, I think, showed me my own capacity and strength in being able to remove myself from the situation that was not suited for me and was quite, traumatic for me. And the other was the loss that I had feared my entire life and knew that would impact me for the rest of my life in a way that I don't know that you ever fully recover from the loss of a parent. The other was like, I can't wait to recover from this.
Yeah.
It was like, I want to move through this grief so I can be done with it. Losing my mom was like, I'm going to continuously access this grief in various ways. Like even today is a great example. This is a very big moment for me and I'm so excited to have you here. And yesterday it was really hard for me thinking my mom would have like called to give me a pep talk. She would have put it in the calendar or said something, And so I think just the recognition that one of those moments of grief was welcome and needed. And the other was tragic and just the most undesirable kind of grief I could have imagined.
Isn't that interesting that like grief can hold that level of paradox?
Yes.
Like one is like, I'm excitedly sad.
Yeah.
I think when we have grief that's associated with like the ending of a circumstance that reminds us of what we've tolerated, of who what we've let ourselves be or the standard we've created.
Or accepted.
Right. That through that we are grieving that we let ourselves down, that we didn't have access to our voice, whatever it is. But you grieve what was possible in the time we spent learning the thing.
Yeah.
And that's like there's a beautiful grief to that because you have to have compassion for the younger parts of us that didn't know till we know. And the way to honor the younger part is to change. And I remember having a lot of judgment for like men with frosted tips, puka shell necklaces, when they weren't in integrity in terms of their relationship to women. Well, I had frosted tips, I had a puka shell necklace, and I wasn't in integrity in my relationship to women. So I still hadn't cultivated and excavated the totality that was available to me in that behavior because I was judging it still in other people.
That's an interesting point to make too. Yeah. There is definitely that heightened awareness of the projection that we manifest sometimes when you're coming out of it and you're sort of looking back on yourself going, that was me, and it's an acceptance of the version of myself that I was. And it sounds like similarly for you, it's almost an out of body experience, but looking at your past self and saying like, that's not who I am now.
Yeah. And being grateful, even though it's hard to do, to be grateful for who I was, because that's the only reason I know what I know today.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
I remember being in this psychotherapy training and it was a group training. And one of the parts of the training is I had to face all the women in the group and apologize for how I had behaved when I was younger and just like my lack of integrity. And
now, these aren't women that you actually had. No, this was an exercise?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was so profound about it. I mean, it was profound on many levels. I was in tears because I was really connecting with the shame I had. And we're talking like infidelity, just womanizing, but like operating in language. Like I don't want anything. I'm not interested. I'm not looking for a relationship. But I unconsciously, this was not conscious, I could sense that some of them wanted a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So I could feel I was taking advantage of that. In hindsight, I could see
Right.
these things. And that my own fear of intimacy was causing me to control intimacy, to control the depth of connection, right? So I was, although easily I would have been able to justify it through like, I was always honest. I was about my intentions and what I desired. Mm-hmm. But I was really dancing in the gray of language. I was a master of dancing in the gray of language. And I think probably now on social media, I would have been called a narcissist. But I still had empathy. So there was still that.
To be fair, though, if we look at the true definition of a narcissist,
it wouldn't have been
that. I think like.
We're talking the pop psychology.
Yeah, totally.
Instagram version. Whenever we call any avoidant behavior narcissism, mm-hmm. which I had avoidant behavior. I had a disorganized attachment style. As soon as someone wanted me, I ran. As soon as they didn't want me, I ran towards. So what's interesting, though, is as I can face these women and apologize to the feminine for my behavior, they were all in tears because they had all experienced some level and craved in some way an apology from someone.
Yeah.
And so it was this profound moment for me where we shared a lot of communication after and a lot of gratitude. I was so grateful they held that space for me. But that day, I went back to my room and I was meditating. And I felt the younger version of me re-enter my body. Like, I swear to God, I was like eyes closed. And I felt like 21-year-old me just like come and sit down inside me because he was welcome again. And it made me realize that I spent so much of my time rejecting younger versions of myself because I was ashamed of them, mm-hmm. not realizing that the only reason I could even develop the shame of the behavior and the awareness that better behavior was available was because of what they'd been through.
Wow.
Yeah, it was like a completely profound change for me.
I'm going to walk away from this conversation with that sort of in my head as one of the pivotal moments that's going to spark more change and growth in my life. So thank you for this. Yeah. I think a lot about how when I was younger, I say to my wife constantly, I'm like, I was so desperate. And looking back on that version of myself, I'm sad for her.
Yeah.
Like, it's sad that you felt so out of alignment with who you are, that you don't want to accept that that's who you were. Like, it was not, I came out when I was like 18, 19, but it was sort of a slow drip and kind of gradually letting people know. And it was very weird and uncomfortable. And it was, almost 20 years ago now. So I feel like part of that is, the discussions have changed. People are feeling more open with it. But there's this part of me that as an adult, I've really needed to be able to go back and say like, okay, what did I learn from that? And how has that shaped me to who I am now? And being able to really look at that and do it, as you said, with compassion, giving yourself grace, and also just being willing to inquire about that. I think a lot of people, I'm the friend that is like, you should be in therapy. Are you in therapy? Everybody should be in therapy. And I feel like so many people either know that they should and won't, or don't understand the value of it. And I feel like what it is at its core when somebody doesn't want to talk about it, whether it's in therapy or with somebody else or doing whatever sort of self-work that you do, is like, you don't want to sit with the reality of what you already know.
Right. You don't want to confront it.
Yeah. And so when you do actually confront it, that's when the real growth starts to happen. But it's that, that pivotal moment of discomfort. Like, are you getting yourself through it so you can get to the other side of it? Or are you kind of remaining complacent with the life that you have and establishing that who you are right now is just who you're going to be in maybe slightly varying forms over the years? And to actually have true, real, meaningful transformation, as you're describing, requires you to go back to those places and look back at those versions of yourself and really ask, what is it that I want to hold on to? And what is it that I can release?
Yeah, you have to have that humility, the like accurate audit of your behavior, what you want to keep, what you don't. And it all takes eating a shit sandwich. Like,
Facts.
really, the first piece of humble pie you got to eat is the worst one.
Yeah, totally.
But you go from running from who you are to creating who you are. Like instead of running from the things you're ashamed of, now you're actually listening to them, and now you can change. So there's a liberation that comes through it. It's just that the doorway to liberation doesn't feel so good. But that's also because we're not shown that the feeling that you have when you learn that a better behavior is available, it should be modeled by adults, and it should be modeled by our parent. When a parent makes a mistake, that they apologize. My parents have done that when I was young. But, like a lot of us don't even witness our parents. We witness them fight, but we don't witness them repair. That usually happens behind closed doors. So, you look at agencies in the government. The government doesn't apologize and repair. Are you kidding me? Like all these things that we consider to be the models of adult or responsibility or authority, etc., are not modeling the actual behavior that we need. If you think about it, a lot of government, and that's probably a whole other podcast, actually infantilize us.
Oh, yeah.
We don't trust that you can handle this information. We don't trust that we need to take care of you, create dependency. And we don't see that very dynamic actually, like us not growing our own food, us not being in our own spaces, us not being in village. This is all ways that we become dependent on something and we lose our sovereignty. The same is true in relationship with, like, if you believe that a conversation you're going to have could break up your relationship, and your relationship is actually how you find financial safety, which we could look back at history, and that was true for almost all women.
Yep.
And it's still true for a lot of women today and true for a lot of men today. And then we can see that relationship and that conversation is likely not going to happen.
Right.
That's why, when we even have that conversation we were having earlier about things that can happen in our lives, like abuse, we still have to be well-resourced to leave something.
Very true. Yeah.
Right. And so it's like someone recognizing that they're, in circumstances that are unhealthy. That's why we have support groups. That's why we need to lean on people, because in order to change, you have to be both internally and externally resourced. Externally being like community, being in nature, right? Like going to, like, where were we ever taught, unless we were part of indigenous communities, where are you ever taught to go sit in a forest and allow the forest to hold you?
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? If someone said that to me when I was 19, I'd have been like, I'll let a woman hold me, but I'm letting a forest hold me. But that shows you that I was sourcing what I actually needed in different ways. And internally resourced means starting to discover what true agency means, true choice. There's this saying that the opposite of trauma is choice, because usually when we go through trauma, it's usually unexpected, right? Or something we couldn't control.
Or unwitting. I think when I consider just the nature of what I was describing with like covert narcissistic abuse is like, it was unwitting for so long. But had I paid attention to the things that I truly felt, I would have recognized it sooner.
Yeah, my wife talks about in our book, she talks about how her body was the somatic canary in the coal mine. Yes,
I heard her say that when you guys were chatting, and I was like, this is great.
It's so beautiful.
So true.
Because you think about it, the body is the way, man, and it knows. And look what happens when we don't listen to it. Inflammation, dis-ease, mental health issues. These, to me, like The Myth of Normal, the book by Gabor Mate, speaks so much to like all of the issues we're having. They're completely normal response to a totally dysfunctional world. And I'm like, man, we got to return to nature. That's really the answer. And, we're kind of at the precipice, and I would argue we're probably already there, of what, they would call the singularity, which is where man and machine, or human and machine, merges. I mean, we've already kind of merged. You think about it, like we probably think about having a chip implanted in us is when that happens, which I think actually just happened with Elon Musk company.
Oh God, did it?
But is it that, or is it when your psychosomatic, like when your energy and your psychic energy is actually being co-opted and used and expressed? Like the internet is spoken about being sort of like human consciousness in this digital format. And if you look at the network of the internet, it's very much like the network of the brain and human systems. So this isn't to say that the internet's bad, because, we met through the internet. It's great.
I'm here for it.
Right. Like we get to live out our passions. It's offered more opportunity to more people than ever. But like any tool, we have to be really mindful, because there will always be people who will actually take the psychopathic route.
Totally.
And we believe that everyone is good and that's a beautiful belief, but you have to be discerning. And that's the problem, is we believe in everyone's potential and that's great to hold. I can hold someone's potential and be like, you're going to be amazing one day.
Yeah.
if you choose to step towards it.
Well, that's such a
joining
piece of it, right?
Right. Like how does someone get sober? They don't get sober because their family's like, here's more money and here's more of our resources and here's more of our pain.
Mm-hmm.
We're just going to keep supporting you till you finally figure it out. No, fierce love says, I see your potential and I'm holding you to it. Like it says, like, you can do this.
But you have to do it.
Exactly. It's allowing the other person to become an adult. And it's actually like, if you think about what feeds addiction, which I love Gabor Mate's question is, right?
It's fantastic. I could listen all day.
When he says like the wrong question is why the addiction, the right question is why the pain. So you look at, if someone doesn't believe that they can make choices, they believe they're broken, then an addiction is a perfect possibility. Social media addiction is perfect. Shopping's perfect. Amazon's perfect. Netflix is perfect. All these fit perfectly in for people who do not want is the wrong term, who do not believe that they can step into their fullest potential. But it's only because the world has taught us in many ways, because it's monetizable, that we're broken.
Well, and also that those things will shut you down, right? The whole concept around addiction is we're numbing something. And so to that point that you made about Gabor Mate, I feel like when I was at the worst moments, I was definitely ordering more from Amazon on a regular basis, numbing myself with things that like weren't even good to put into my brain in terms of what I was consuming on Netflix, and just really hiding from the parts of myself that were seeking light and keeping them dark, like really
feeding the darkness.
Yes, feeding the darkness. Yeah. That's a great way of putting it. So when you think about your own life and how you've moved through some of the challenging points that you've experienced, what is it that you've recognized within yourself that sort of signals to you that you're out of integrity? I mean, like obviously we're talking about sort of the somatic piece of it, but also just overall, like how you've cultivated, the sense of self that you have now. How does that impact like the decisions that you're making?
Well, I'd say a sense of distress is usually a pretty good sign. Mental anguish, like my body feeling off, feeling anxious. That for me is a big one. Where I continue to see possibility, and I think this is an important distinction, that it's, what usually wakes us up is some really bad experience, a rock bottom of sorts. And that can be anything, loss of job, food, illness, it can be all these body, right? It could be all these different ways, breakups, abuse, things like this, drugs, whatever. And so they wake us up to the fact that we haven't been paying attention and there's stuff that is unresolved.
Yeah.
And you were talking about therapy. I think it's James Hillman who says that we don't go to therapy to have what's broken fixed. We go to have what's broken blessed. I love that, because what usually starts our journey of transformation is there's something wrong with me and I need to fix it.
Yeah.
There could be actually so many beautiful things created from that doorway, from that entry point. However, at some point we have to make the transition that actually I'm not broken and I need to be fixed. I have challenges that are actually showing me my possibility and my potential.
Ooh, I like that.
So it shifts from a perspective of I'm already whole, I'm just expanding, instead of I'm broken and I have to put these patches, on this, and I'm flawed, and there's another course and another book and another thing. And it's like, really at the end of the day, it's always about change. And I remember asking Sherry Salata, who worked with Oprah for years. She was the president of O Network. She was the producer of Oprah. And I said to her, man, you've like met everybody. Like, you got
you've been
Deepak on speed dial. You got Eckhart on speed dial on your favorites list. I said, like, what is one truth that you know to hold true about all like their messages? And she said that you don't need them. And then she was like, actually, let me change that. It's that you need them to remind you that you don't.
Mm.
And I think about that recognition that the best teachers remind you that you're powerful. They don't need you to need them, because that's just more codependency.
Right.
So it's like our path in relationship and in our own work, in my opinion, is to liberate ourselves, and through our own liberation, liberate others. Relationships are the greatest vehicle for that friction. So when I look at my own change, I see that my work continues to be, which is so layered because it's really interesting. It's like we have a son now. And so we went from being 2 people in a relationship to being 3.
Yes.
And that means that there's 3 people who have needs in our family system.
3 people to consider.
Right. And one of them doesn't know how to advocate for himself yet.
Right.
Right? Jasper, he's only 11 months. He's getting good, but it doesn't make sense what he's saying. He just screeches and you kind of guess. Oh, do you want that? Do you want that? Are you upset? Are you hungry? Did you poop? Right? There's all these.
It's a very big guessing game for a while.
Yeah, exactly. That's where I'm like, I pooped. I got to go.
Yeah.
But what it's magnified for me is that I need to be a fierce advocate for my own needs in relationship.
Mm.
And the beautiful thing is when I bring this awareness, there's a bit of grief because I'm recognizing, shit, I haven't advocated for my needs as much as I really should have up until this point. And my partner can hear that. She's like, hey, like, I get it. And if I have oriented around her needs, which is a natural predisposition for me, just look at my family system pattern that I was telling you about, then that means the person who normally is used to being centered in the relationship, not perhaps by their own making, but because of the other person.
We allow it, right? We develop that,
that they actually have to de-center themselves a little bit. So it's not just me who has to advocate. There has to be actually, through the other person, an advocation for my advocation.
Yeah.
Right? That there's like support in me expanding and taking up more space, which my wife is tremendous at. And so we've cultivated that relational culture that's like, hey, if something's coming up for me, it's coming up for you. And if it's coming up for you, it's coming up for me. I just might not see it yet.
Yeah.
So anytime I'm advocating for myself more, that means I'm advocating for the relationship more. I believe in the relationship.
I love that.
And I'm also modeling it for my son.
Well, I love that you said that too, Mark, because I was curious because of everything that you do and the conversations that you're having around our dynamics with other people, and also the inner child work and things that you and your wife have discussed, was what is it like for you now as a new parent to see these opportunities with your son through the lens of the work that you've done? Like, how do you see what you've created and established for yourself and with your wife and in your relationship as the most important things for you to model to your son?
Well, it creates a whole new level of accountability.
That is factual.
Right? Like now I have a whole new avenue to fuel my transformation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like immediately when he was born, I was like, okay, I got to get in the fittest shape of my life because like I need to be here.
That's an interesting point too, that was kind of one of the first places that you went, is that like physical health, like make sure that I have longevity.
Yeah, I'm 45. I'm that movie Old Dads on Netflix.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's going to be me and Bill Burr, you know? So there's that part, was just this recognition, like very seldom in your life can you tap into that level of motivation. So, you know, where there's a joke culturally that dads get dad bod.
Yeah.
I was like, what happens if I actually completely change the narrative about this and I use this moment as an opportunity to change myself and claim something that has always been something I've been involved in, but not fully stepped into, you know, and that it's not punitive. It's not like I hate my body, I hate my choice. It's like, whoa, I feel so good. And because I feel good, I can be more present to my son. So there was that aspect. I'd say the other side is that it made me dive much deeper into the neurodevelopment of children and babies, especially, which my wife has definitely spearheaded. But the other cool thing about it has been well, one, we bond on it. My wife and I talk a lot about it. But this morning he's learning to walk right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so he'll often like take one of your hands or both, or he just like Hail Marys and throws both your hands. So I kind of hover around him just to protect him from falling.
Yeah.
This morning I tried a new technique where my hand was in the front and one behind. And when he fell, I went to catch him and I caught the side of his head. And he fell down and I had like my fingers had just kind of run along his cheek. Mm-hmm. And he kind of looked at me like, whoa, like he has yet to really fall on his face, which we know is going to happen. I can't protect him from the realities of the world.
Well, and you said as a metaphor for the rest of his life as well.
Right, exactly. And immediately I picked him up and I was like, I'm so sorry. Like, that's Dad. I should have had you and I'm sorry. And I got you and I might not always be able to catch you, but I'm really sorry. And that alone was just this opportunity for me to be with him and to recognize he's probably a little disappointed because even though he can't make sense of it, my hand's the thing that caught him on the way down. And it was just such a beautiful moment, you know, and just get to be with him in his feelings. And then he wanted Mom, which I also had to be with that. Like, okay, we repaired.
Yeah.
And now he really just needs to be soothed by Mom, which makes sense. So then I have to be with that part that I'm like, why am I not enough to soothe you? But then I recognize there's so many more things going on, just like neurobiologically with his mom.
Yeah.
So there's that. And I've really been recognizing how much advocacy, self-advocacy, taking up space is also in some ways oppositional to cultural momentum right now. And so I really notice that the codependent patterns within interpersonal relationships is really magnified by social media.
Yeah.
And so I've been really in this dance of this for probably like deep in it for 3 years. Feel like I'm coming out of it a bit now, where what I've been able to access is like what is true integrity, what is like self-trust, what is discernment, what is curiosity, what is openness. Because I think more now than ever, we need people who are capable of building bridges between ideologies, you know, because they become a trap, but they also become safe. They're
That's an interesting
safe,
point.
But they're not actually safe.
Something that I feel is really important and I want to be able to message more clearly and just embrace more on my own accord is being more of that bridge myself, like as an elder millennial, being somebody who, you know.
Elder millennial, I like that term.
That's
not senior citizen, but it's like an older young person.
Right, exactly.
I like it.
I will have to give credit to Eliza Schlesinger because that was one of her stand-up specials. And I was like, this resonates with me. Yeah. And I feel like for me, this recognition that, okay, there are people who are in Gen X who are like sort of leading the cycle breaking, but the elder millennial, younger Gen X group, I feel is sort of, we're the people who are saying, okay, enough is enough. We recognize the problems. We see the patterns. We want to start to resolve those things. And in doing this, I can speak upwards to my father, who's 66, and say, hey, have you thought about these things? Or you're not great at boundary setting. These are things that you should consider. Right. And then on the flip side of that, looking at Gen Z or even my sister's kids who are just recently 4 and 6 and seeing like, how can I show up for them? What can I give them that, you know, I didn't have that I needed? And it's really profound to have these moments of understanding that you can give to other people the things that you didn't necessarily have but needed. And I think, you know, in regard to what you were saying about your son Jasper, it made me consider this moment that I had with my nephew when I was there over the holidays, and he has really big emotions. And I mean, I still do, but when I was a kid, I had fewer skills to navigate those emotions. And I feel like, you know, I would get grounded and I would be sent to my room and it was like, you've had this big emotion, go sit with it, go deal with it. What I would do is probably scream, cry, or sleep to just regulate myself. And when he was having these emotions, like he just goes away. And my sister and brother-in-law are great. Like I really admire the way that they're parenting. And to your point about apologizing, like, wow, what a concept. You know, and it's beautiful to see. But I was happy to take those moments as the aunt and come in and be like, okay, like I'm going to sit with you. What is it that you're feeling? Why is it that you want to run and hide? Like nobody thinks that you did anything wrong. And trying to, rationalize with a 3-4-year-old is like a task in and of itself. But I feel like there was just really something powerful in that moment to be able to see the potential in what we're learning and how not only we're applying that to our own lives, but how that can transcend and create, as you referred to it, the liberation for other people as well. So like this is not really a question, but more of a statement of agreement and also just recognition and gratitude for the fact that you are doing the work that you're doing, because inviting people into these conversations and sharing that knowledge is the jumping off point for a lot of people. I mean, it could be somebody listening to an episode of your show or this episode or something else. And just, when that moment clicks, and it's just this beautiful manifestation of all of the work that we've done and all of the work that is yet to be done.
Oh man. And it's endless, and that's, again, not a sign of our inadequacy, but a sign of unlimited potential.
Yeah.
Like, what a different way to see it. Like, oh, I just learned a thing. Here I am. Like, I guess I have more to learn. Yeah, no shit.
Yeah.
Like, as soon as you say you don't have more to learn, the universe is going to slap you with a real big lesson that you always have more to learn.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember thinking that once, and then, oh, wow.
Yeah.
The tsunami. Yeah, if there's one thing people can always know is that it's never too late to change. I met this one woman at a conference I was speaking at, and she was in her 60s. And she had said, like, what's the point? It's too late for me. I was like, shit, you're a woman who's healthy. You could be living to your 90 something.
Yeah.
So you're 60. I think she was 66. So let's say you live till 96, 86. You have 20 more years of apathy. 20 years. You want your like most potentially like, ideally, if we all get to retire, which that's probably a pipe dream these days, thanks inflation. But it's like, those are supposed to be your golden years, and you're going to spend them not golden. Like, It's never too late to change. It's never too late to heal. It's never too late to take the bags back that you hand down the chain. And it's never too late to pass the bags up.
Yeah.
And even if your parents aren't alive, we can all still, burn the bags that they gave us, because this is the point of life, is to liberate ourselves from these patterns so that we can exhale, so we can be well-resourced.
And enjoy it.
Right.
It's like so much of what we've done, and you speaking about social media is such a great example. Like, we have just put our focus on things that are not really creating the fulfillment or the joy. It's like there's this sense of obligation and this sense of responsibility to maybe even like you have a large following, right? If we become too entrenched in what we're doing for everybody else, then it can easily get sucked back into that pattern of self-abandonment. And I'm curious with the work that you've done. You've done a great job building community. I really admire it. We joined one of your master classes, like I think maybe early in the year or before the end of the year. And I was so happy to have done it because it was right before I think we were introduced, and have this moment of just, okay, I feel like this is what I hope to be able to bring to the table for people. You're so genuine and organic and authentic in the way that you show up, exactly who you are when you are on your podcast or in a masterclass is who I'm witness to today. And so I really admire that. And I think it's a really great example of being conscious of the impact that we can have and knowing that there is that potential, but you can still remain accessible to people and still bring, that knowledge in a way that doesn't feel like it's preaching. It's just, it's sort of the gift that you get to give somebody through your own experiences. And I feel like this is an opportunity for a lot of people, because one of the benefits of the internet is we have the visibility. Anybody at any given time can be the person that you're looking to.
No excuse anymore.
Yeah.
Like, you can learn how to rebuild a car. You could learn how to build a rocket on YouTube.
Yeah.
You could learn all of it. Like the other day, I had to fix something on my car, which I have an old car, which means you're always fixing something. Yeah. And I just started Googling it, found someone who had done the exact same thing I needed. It was with a radiator, and I was doing it. And I had to take a couple trips to the car store, which everyone knows is also part of it.
You have more confidence than I do, because I would be like, I am not sure that this will go the way that it's supposed to.
Well, to be fair, like, I love it. So it's different, right?
Fair.
For other people, that's like, I'd rather just pay somebody. And I get that. That's a lot of other things.
I'm like, I don't want to die because I fixed my own car.
Yeah. Listen, I'm not doing a brake job. That's for sure.
Fair.
That's for sure. But yeah, there's so much you can learn. To me, there is no excuse to not become everything, now. And granted, there are life circumstances that I am not minimizing.
Right.
But man, I think as much as we like hate on Gary Vaynerchuk or David Goggins,
yeah.
part of their motivations is like, you don't even know what you're capable of. Like, you haven't even touched a thread of what's possible for you. And it is when people wake up to their choices that they can choose, they have been choosing, even if they don't like their choices, let that cook you, right? And it's like, that's when they're free, because all of a sudden now they wake up to, well, if I've been choosing all that shit, that means I could choose other shit. Yeah. And then now what's possible? Oh, wait, I don't have to listen to all the bullshit limiting beliefs, everyone. Like, when I was in college, people were like, you have to do marketing or you have to do finance if you want to make money, be a good provider,
right?
Blah, blah. It's like, now I'm in Vancouver and I'm like, the average house is frickin', I don't even know, $3 million or something like
stupid.
that. When I was a kid, I'm not sure if this was true for you, but you always thought that the wealthy people were people who were like doctors or lawyers, right? That was, or accountants.
Yeah, we're insurance people.
Right. Now I'm like, well, how the hell are they buying a house in Vancouver?
Oh, yeah, no, they're not.
Canada's housing problem is a fucking whole other
They're
thing,
probably they're probably the people who are in those positions that also have a social media following.
Right, exactly. They're doctor influencers.
Yes.
Carnivore MD, he has a house.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I think about now, I'm like, when you have a job for a company, which is not, I had a job with a company for 14 years. It's like you're always limited by the market cap of that job.
I feel that
you can
deeply.
never make more than that. And look, man, this is not projecting what I desire for my life on anyone. For some people, they want to be innovators and creators in someone else's business.
Mm-hmm.
But like the abundance capacity of someone who is in their gifts, like what I do, if someone from branding was giving me advice, they would never say, be you all everywhere. Right? Like that's not.
But that's what works.
Well, because now people crave authenticity. And the good thing is, I don't have to remember anything I've said that's not me. Right?
Well, because you were in sales, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was in tech for 15 years. I left this summer. And
congratulations.
Thank you.
That's big.
Talk about liberation.
Yeah.
And thanks to my wife for supporting me in that. And
way to go, wife. Shout out.
And I think that the thing that I always hated, and I'll say to her all the time, is I hate networking at like conferences because I feel like I have to sell somebody something they don't need or that I don't want.
Sales,
right. Yeah. And so I wasn't even in sales, but it's like having to put on that sales hat was so out of integrity with me. And the way that I choose to network now, and she's like, you're great at it because you're not trying to.
Yeah.
Because
you had all that training.
Yes, exactly.
If you're good at selling something you didn't want.
Right, exactly. Imagine how good you can be if you do. And it's like, just because I care about developing the relationships, then I can focus on, is there something that can be mutually beneficial for people? But when you're in a position where, as you said, some people are comfortable being able to deliver the value for somebody else. But the thing that I always felt that was off for me, and it was my entire career, was I feel like I should be working for myself. I feel like there should be something that like I'm doing that is not whatever it is that I'm in the midst of. And I had forgotten that you were in pharma sales until I had re-listened to something recently. And I was like, oh gosh, yeah. It's like, I can only imagine how stifling that must have felt because of being witness to everything I've been witness to in what you've created. And it's like, that is so inspiring to know that you, as kind of we're rounding out the conversation, it's like your accountability, the choices that you're making, those are going to be the things that define your path. And they're going to be the things that liberate you and allow you to invite other people to liberate themselves, which is, I think, something you or Kylie said in the conversation that I mentioned earlier. And I found that just to be so comforting and also really powerful.
Yeah, I think it's Elizabeth Gilbert. I shared that quote that she wrote to Glennon Doyle. Mm-hmm. It's in her book. I forget Glennon Doyle's recent book.
Oh, Untamed.
Untamed, where she says there's no such thing as one-way liberation. Like if you're free, the other person is, they just don't know it yet.
Mm.
You know, and that's part of the principles of liberated love that we talk about, is honoring another path as their own. Like
yes.
Trusting. You know, I was once talking to a friend of mine who's a mindset coach, and I said to him, Peter Crone, and I was saying to him, look, I'm struggling. I wanted to let go of this employee that I had, this is years ago, who was an incredible human, loved. And I was saying to him, like, I'm just worried, like, she won't be okay and all that kind of stuff. And talk about codependency again, which, not to negate the care for people, but the fact that I'm willing now to like put my business at risk or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
And he says to me, how arrogant of you to believe that you know what's better for her than what is trying to actually move through her.
Wow.
Like, you don't know that that's not the best thing that'll ever happen to her.
I mean, I got laid off and it was the best thing that happened to me.
Right. And now she has the job of her dreams. This is years later. She loves it. She's happy. We're still friends, you know, and I'm like, wow, it's so, when you can let go of people with that level of reverence for their ability as an adult to make their way through the world, you're actually saying, I trust you, which is, again, not to minimize the pain of losses or how hard it is to let someone go and work, but that if you're feeling called to it, at least you're being called to bring a conversation forward. And I think that's true of relationship. It's like, when you're feeling called to leave one, you have to bring that truth to the relationship.
Right.
Because it exists anyways. Now, what you might do with that truth, why do you want to leave? Have you always wanted to leave? You know, how did it start? You know, would you ever want it to work out? There's a lot of points of inquiry, but you have to actually start with that truth. And if you bring that truth forward, at least to yourself first, you can navigate it, decide if you need to bring it forward or end the relationship. But where relationships either end or dive much deeper is when a partner is willing to say, I will no longer dance around the elephant in the room, or I will no longer hold back. Because if you hold back truth from your partner, it means you don't trust them to hold it, which means they never develop the capacity to hold it, which means they never develop the skill set that you don't think they have.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you touch on something that I feel very strongly, which is that I don't like when people say to me, I didn't want to tell you because I didn't know how you'd react. And it's like, you're not even giving me a chance to have the response.
Right. You're choosing for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which, if we had other people choose for us, especially when we're young, or take away our choice, that'll be a trigger for sure.
Yeah. And I find it really fascinating too, just how much we can learn from observing those moments too, because that's not something that I even understood until I was out of these varieties of situations and looking back on it. And it all comes back to, you know, who am I? How do I want to show up in the world? What do I care about? And, you know, what am I bringing forward and what am I leaving behind? This has been such an amazing conversation, Mark. I appreciate you. I appreciate just everything that we've gone through and over. And I hope that this is just one of many conversations, because it's just been such a blast to hear your perspective and to be invited into your world and to learn more about you. And this has just been an absolute delight. And I feel very honored that you took the time to meet with me in person.
Oh, so grateful that you had me on. So grateful that you trust me with your audience, who I know you've spent a lot of time cultivating.
Thank you. Is there anywhere else that you want people to follow you, or anything else that you want to share with listeners before we hop off here?
Well, yeah, you can go, if you love the ideas that we discussed. Kylie, my wife, and I have a new book coming out April 16th, which is called Liberated Love, and it's available for pre-order. Perfect. And we have, if you buy it, you can go to createthelove.com/liberatedlove, and there's a free meditation and a workbook that goes along. You just enter your order number.
Amazing.
Yeah, and so they'll get access to that. And that meditation is really about identifying a lot of the things we talked about today. Because, you know, let's be honest, it all shows up romantically before it really shows up anywhere.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's really great too to just be witness to what you refer to as the rupture in your relationship and the repair, and then to see this. I think you both referred to it as sort of your book baby, you know. Oh yeah, my gosh. and to be able to see how two people can grow apart from one another and then reconvene and develop something that's so strong. I can't wait to dive into the book and to just see more of the content that you're creating and the love that you're putting out into the world and helping other people create.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. Gang, thanks so much for joining me for this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I loved having it. It was such an incredible opportunity to sit down with Mark, and I'm so grateful that we had the chance to do it in person. I know that this episode and our conversation will resonate with so many people. So if you can please share this episode with at least one person that you know will get something from it, it would mean the world to me. I know that it can be challenging for us to navigate relationships, and I've done the toxic thing more times than I can count. So being able to tune into ourselves and really understand more about who we are and how we show up is just absolutely instrumental in growing into our full potential. So go ahead and hit that share button here on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, and send this to somebody that will benefit from hearing it. In the meantime, you can also subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts as well, and visit canijustsaypodcast.com for more. We'll catch you on the flip side.